Hello, denizens. So, the insufferable John Oliver did a bit on Last Week Tonight last year on gender-affirming care and how it was benign wonderfulness. J.K. Rowling roasted him, and recently John did a whole show in response on why J.K. and the TERFs out there are wrong about all these misunderstood trans-identified men in sports who just want to have fun. John has an obvious pro-trans bias, which includes the entire women's space accommodation issue. Let me be clear about my bias. I draw the line at no male bodies in women's spaces or non-co-ed sports. Is that anti-trans? With that settled, I'm not going to argue Oliver's points. That's happening online right now, enriching the social media platforms that make money from engagement. As your retired sketch comedian, I want to go over the techniques John used to set up and elicit the gales of canned laughter on his show. I call it How to Lie Using Comedy. Of course, one person's lie is another person's perspective. I don't lie on my appalling news channel, at least not on purpose. It's funnier that way, but I do use sarcasm and jokes to ridicule. Most of Oliver's humor is derived from setting up easily ridiculed straw men and gets a laugh for the benefit of his target lefty audience. He also throws in self-deprecation to convey that he's not entirely evil. I would love to know why this trans thing is a cause celeb for Oliver. Does he have any trans family or friends? That's usually the case. I think Megan Fox is up to 12 trans children now. Apparently, one of his staff is trans, but I found no evidence for that. I want to assure you that I will not use any similar disingenuous comedy writing techniques to squeeze laughs out at John's expense. Well, maybe just a little. Oliver has a 12-member comedy writing staff, so this presentation only has to be 1/12 as funny. I should mention that I have exactly the same qualifications to discuss this topic as John does, which is none. John started with, "We're actually going to start with our main story this week, and it concerns an absolute fixation of the right, because even as the market crashes in the wake of Trump's tariffs, Fox News spends a lot of time on this." As John's arguments are weak, here we get the focus of his ire, attaching the attack on trans people to the evil Republicans, the conservative assault on the rights of trans athletes, and Fox News. I get it, John. You hate Trump. So does Samantha Bee, and she isn't funny either. John's first example for ridicule was a female fencer. "Why, that's the story everyone is going to be interested in. Are you sure about that? The story about fencing and not the one that's caused the stock ticker in the corner of your screen to go bright red like an inflamed hemorrhoid? Also, I challenge those anchors to tell me one thing about fencing. Besides, Lindsay Lohan did it against herself in the Parrot Trap. I don't think you can do it." He contrasts women's fencing with the plunging stock market because it's a dig at Trump. This is called Juxtaposition, a silly sport versus the end of the world as we know it. Then he compared the out-of-shape Fox News anchors with Lindsay Lohan's fencing skills in Parent Trap. My God, John, a reference to a 1998 movie? Although Oscar Wilde did use inflamed hemorrhoids in his play A Woman of No Importance. Oliver then continued to hammer the Republicans and Trump with insults and invective. Okay, to be completely fair to Trump, I will say his understanding of women's issues is comparable to his understanding of foreign policy, domestic policy, trade, the economy, the concept of consent, human empathy, and all but one of his children's names. This is called a list joke, because it is a rapid-fire list of implied or factual ironies ending with a punchline. Delivering it cleanly always impresses the laugh machine. But John is now suddenly referring to women's rights. You can't suck and blow at the same time, John. You're either protecting sausage danglers or women. Pick one. Now, the one decent laugh in the entire show came when Oliver mentioned J.K. Rowling's extensive tweeting against his suppositions. He remarked, "And honestly, it feels a bit weird to catch that much heat from the creator of Harry Potter, especially when I clearly look like what would have happened to him if they just left him in that cupboard for the rest of his life." That was funny. All is forgiven, John. Then he featured Lance Armstrong, making the case that if Rafael Nadal had transitioned, he'd still beat any women on the tennis circuit. John, of course, made fun of Armstrong's less than stellar doping history. Now, clearly, when it comes to questions of right and wrong in sports, Lance Armstrong might be the last person you call just after the 1990 Chicago White Sox and the ear chunks that Mike Tyson took a bite of. Hey, it's a cheap shot against Lance that I would also have gone for. But really, you've now given us Lindsay Lohan, 1990 Chicago White Sox, and Mike Tyson references. What's next, John? A Gorbachev joke? Ignore the point Lance was making and make fun of the interlocutor. That is called deflection and something that John uses often. But it was good for a laugh. Still, one might notice that John didn't pick, Martina Navratilova, a fierce advocate for protecting women's sports, because that wouldn't have been funny and she would have shredded him. Then John featured Joanna Harper, who researches male advantages after transitioning. She said, "Trans women don't transition for sports. No one has ever said, 'Oh, yeah, I think I'd like to be a woman so I can do well in women's sports.'" Harper mentions sad things that happened in her life as a trans person that were completely irrelevant. Then John followed that up with, "Right. No one says I'm going to transition just for the sake of sports. The same way no one says, 'Could you please send me more messages about two-factor authentication?'" Ouch, my side is hurting. Oh, ow. Two-factor authentication gags are killer. I promise not to take issue with the content, but I have to step in here and say, this is bollocks. It is evident to anyone who has seen the absolute sardonic glee of trans winners, hurdlers many body lengths ahead of their female competitors, yelling, fist pumping as they cross the finish line, Leah Thomas's horrific expressions, cyclists, Olympic boxers, anyone? None of these look like winning. They look like they hate women. John also failed to mention the clear conflict of interest that Joanna is a trans athlete, though that was hard to miss. I think it was an important omission, but John is on a mission of omission. He also used cis. If there was any doubt how far down the gender wang rabbit hole John has gone, now there is no doubt. Okay, back to the hilarity. He makes a Kid Rock joke. Jeepers. For a current events show, it's not very current. I'm going to skip a bunch of the show here, as it's either John making arguments for how trans-identifying men are loved by all the other girls on the team, or how much more difficult it is for a trans inmate to beat up on women in prison now that they've completed gender-affirming care. Sorry, that was one of mine. And the joke setups are pretty much rinse and repeat. He does give us a new angle regarding Riley Gaines, the swimmer, who he says didn't suffer from her encounter in the pool with Leah Thomas because rather than becoming a dental hygienist, she is now a famous activist and speaker. Thank God for men taking trophies away from women. Who knew there was an upside to it? Then John went in for some tried and true religious humor. Here he shows a clip of Mike Johnson, Republican Speaker of the House, who said, "We know from Scripture and from nature that men are men and women are women and men cannot become women." Then John responds with, "That's right, Mike. As Scripture tells us, men are men and women are women, and God is his own son, and some mothers are virgins, and some mothers-in-law are pillars of salt, and some daughters are sex partners," etc., etc. Notice the use of the list technique. Sure, there are some strange things in the Bible, but claiming men can become women is not one of them. But John often makes fun of Christians because they are a safe target. John does a bit about what is the big deal about girls' washrooms, the point of which I didn't understand. Anyway, that was pretty much it. So to repeat what comedy techniques John employs in no particular order, he sets up bogeymen, usually on the right, makes fun of religion, includes spokespeople with a fatal flaw that can be ridiculed. He employs self-deprecation, salty adjectives, and invective, then the usual assortment of juxtaposition jokes and culture references too old for a senior's residence. You will also notice sometimes he shouts because louder makes everything funnier. And when he doesn't have a punchline, he says fuck. Hope that was helpful for any of you budding comedy writers out there. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have any questions about the techniques I mentioned, feel free to ask. Till next time, denizens, be seeing you.